Good evening, everyone. I am Felix Obi, and I'm going to be your instructor for this class, Economics 330, Global Trade and Political Economy at Medgar Evers College, City University of New York. It is an honor and distinct pleasure to partner with you in the next 15 weeks to explore a topic that, although some of you may not realize it right now, is very critical to the way we conduct our daily lives. Global trade and political economy may seem like an abstract subject, but I assure you, it undergirds everything about our daily lives. Global trade is the reason why we're able to get flowers from Kenya in our supermarkets, buy televisions from China, and of course, sell plenty US goods and services overseas. The ability of the institutions that regulate this trade informs the ability for goods to stay competitive. And we are going to delve into this issue. So when we discuss inflation, it impacts on this class. But one of the major commitments that I'm going to make is to make sure, to the extent possible, that this class is not very theoretical, that I try to translate the theories to the reality of our everyday transactions. That is a commitment that I make, and that is one that I'm going to try to live up to. One of the things that I will also encourage you to do is that during most lectures, if not all, there are going to be key phrases and buzzwords that are a signaling mechanism for people to understand that your audience to understand that you have a technical understanding of global trade and political economy, that you are indeed a practitioner and a scholar. So, and I would let you know when some of those phrases come up. Just right quick, and let me also add that there will be a finals and there would be a term paper. The finals would have a multiple choice section and an essay section, and you would have 2 attempts at each. But those are at about the 14th week of the semester, or 13 and a half weeks. So that's ways away. And we're going to also have a term paper, and we're going to work through, based on your schedule and how you're catching up, how we're going to work that out. The one thing that I will encourage you to do is to try to work on every assignment, whether you A for effort, at least do yourself the favor of gaining that A for effort. And then we can walk through on how to help you understand the course content to the best extent that you can. But at least give yourself the opportunity of effort. So I ask everyone that to please at least give yourself that much opportunity. So this course is designed to provide you with analytical tools essential for understanding the complex reality of politics and policy making as they relate to international trade relations among nations. To achieve our course objectives, you will be assigned readings in contemporary and historical discussions of trade policies in the USA, in foreign countries and international forums such as the World Trade Organization, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, World Bank Group, the United Nations, and especially the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. You will analyze complex as well as simple issues that relate to philosophical and practical conflicts that impact on trade relations and economic development nationally and internationally. We will begin by explaining the role of trade among nations, and we're going to cover that today, and in the USA. We will then discuss politics and how it affects policy making, an area of public interest and with regard to trade in particular. While there are conflicts between policy proposals and implementation, There are global and national institutions established to facilitate trade and reduce sources of conflict in international trade. To understand the conflicts better, you will also lay some foundation in political theory as they relate to international trade relations and domestic conflicts regarding trade. We will close with specific international institutions that are cited as the causes of existing conflicts and frictions in domestic and international trade relations. We will conclude the semester by discussing possible recommendations for solutions to present and potential future sources of conflict. It is helpful to note that we will achieve our course objectives by mastering the learning objectives for each model. That said, our learning objectives for this week, our Module 1, are to develop a foundational knowledge for the study of global trade and political economy. So as you may have noted from your assessments this week, the number one um, um, module objective is what is international trade and why is trade among nations beneficial? To which I will say, international trade is the purchase and sale of goods and services by companies in different countries. This may include consumer goods, raw materials, food, and machinery, which are all bought and sold in the international marketplace. Trade among nations is beneficial because the commerce allows countries, and this is critical. This is why international trade is important, and I think it's a critical takeaway. Trade among nations is beneficial because commerce allows countries to expand their markets and access goods and services that otherwise may not have been available domestically. I'll repeat that again. Trade among nations is beneficial because the commerce allows countries to expand their markets. So we're selling more Chevrolet and GMC trucks overseas. So we're expanding markets for GMC and Chevy trucks as an example. But we're also able, because of international trade, to access goods and services that otherwise may not have been available domestically. So we are going to discuss in the weeks ahead things such as comparative and competitive advantage, which is, although there are some things that we import through international trade that we can make locally in America, but we choose to import them because the wage bill in America is high relative to the countries from which we import this from. For instance, if we were to make flip-flops in America and pay the workers who make flip-flops a minimum of $15 an hour, that will suggest that flip-flops in Target, as an example, may need to cost about 3-4 times the $2-3 that they charge in the fall. So because of that, we choose to import flip-flops that are made in South Asia, and then pay $15 or thereabout, depending on where you live, to the store specialists that sell them at Target and other retail stores, so that you're getting the best price possible while creating jobs in the countries where those products and services are sold. The second question is, how does the US economy benefit from international trade and investment? So, according to the Executive Office of the President's Office of the Trade Representative, the United States is the world's largest economy and the largest exporter and importer of goods and services. International trade is critical to America's prosperity, fueling economic growth, supporting jobs at home, raising living standards, and helping Americans provide for their families with affordable goods and services. In 2017, as an example, the US was the world's largest goods and services trading nation, with export of goods and services totaling $2.35 trillion. In addition, the US goods and services trade export plus imports totaled $5.3 trillion. So you can see that trading is a major part of our economy. Agriculture, as an example, accounted for 264 billion in total two-way trade. And manufactured goods total accounted for 3.3 trillion, while services accounted for 1.3 trillion. So these are really huge numbers that impact our economy. And in the weeks ahead, we can discuss how this number not only have an impact on Wall Street and the global markets, but also the regular folks who work regular jobs. Though trade is beneficial, why then is there conflict within and among nations regarding trade? That is, if trade is so beneficial, why are there trade conflicts? International trade conflicts occur, I would say, occur within and among nations, mostly due to power competition, the growing discontent towards globalization, the decline of global trade governance, and tensions from the rise of global value chains, domestic interest in institutions, trade deficit, and exchange rate misalignment. Very quickly, let me tell you one of those phrases. It is called dialectical thinking. Dialectical thinking suggests that you don't truly know an issue unless you think of that issue on all sides. So I just said that it will seem like I'm saying things that are contradictory. I just said that trade is beneficial to the US economy. Yet, in the next sentence, or in the next breath, I suggest that there is growing discontent towards globalization. Now, if you're the person that buys flip-flops at Target for $1, you're happy. And I'm trying to illustrate why this is so. If you're the person that buys flip-flop at Target for $1, you're happy because you only paid $1 for it. So as a consumer, you're happy. However, if you're the person that used to work at a flip-flop factory in Indiana somewhere, and I say Indiana because there are lots of small-scale manufacturing in the state of India, you are displeased because your job has most likely moved to South Asia. At least in the short term, you're displeased. But the reality is that had your job not moved to Southeast Asia, you are going to keep making flip-flops that nobody could afford until eventually your shop closes. So the challenge for government is not to allow you to continue, not to allow your company to continue to make flip-flops that are non-competitive. It is to attract new industry where workers can retrain and reskill to bring value to those high-value jobs and sectors. So, but between when those jobs move overseas and the person is reskilled, there is discontent. And even if they're reskilled and they get a new job, there may still be anxiety that the job loss that they suffered could happen again. And that's not a very comforting feeling. So that would explain some of the discontent towards international trade. But again, at the end of the day, if the products or services you create are economically uncompetitive, that job is going to go away. So the other factor to understand is what is the globalization of trade? Example, what is international political economy? What does that really mean? And this is critical because if we're going to teach a class and be in a class of global trade and political economy, at least we need to have a working definition for international political economy. International political economy is the study of how politics shapes the global economy and how the global economy shapes politics. A key focus in international political economy is on the distributive consequence of global economic exchange. So, for instance, if we live in a society where many of the industries, let's say we work in coal, people who live in West Virginia that used to export coal, obviously we're all aware that there is also global warming and that The science suggests that fossil fuels, especially coal, are major contributors to global warming. And as a result, the global economy is shifting towards cleaner energy. That would mean that coal plants or coal mining operations in West Virginia, as an example, are closing. So if you are a politician that represents West Virginia, you're not going to like global trade too much. The reality of it is that there is a cost if we say no, we are going to continue to dig up coal and power the economy through coal. Because if coal is a major pollutant, it is going to also get people sick, create public health challenges, and inefficient allocation of resources as more money is spent on Medicaid and Medicare taking care of people who are sick, which is why in West Virginia, as an example, there is a higher rate of lung cancer than the general US public. And this is because of the dirty air from coal mining that is prevalent in the region and the pollution that occurs in the stream and creeks and water sources in the area. So there is also a public health cost. But of course, politicians are in the business of winning elections, and they are also in the business of representing the interest of their people. So at least in the short term, you can see how the interest of the people is job stability, regardless of the longer term consequence that can sometimes be a tension and a trade-off. So the fifth question is, what has been the role of the US and other governments and the economy since World War II? To which I would say that especially post-World War II, the United States has led the establishment of a rules-based international system. And we're going to talk about the rules-based system quite a bit as we go through the class, including the global institutions such as the World Bank Group, the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, the World Trade Organization, or the WTO, United Nations, among others, that undergird the rules-based international order. And the sixth and I believe last question for the week is, what developments have taken place over time to facilitate world trade and to remove impediments to trade imposed since World War II? To which I will suggest that the establishment of international and regional trade finance and trade regulators, including regional trade agreements such as USMCA, that these are some of the foundational framework that informed this week's learning activity. So before we go ahead, I'm going to ask a few questions. And feel free, this is the first week of class. Nobody is expected to know many of the topics we're going to cover. But if I've done my job by the 15th week, you will know a heck of a lot more than you do now. So to which I would ask, I would say, how many of us know what the WTO is, World Trade Organization, or what they do? Please go ahead, Mr. Gardner.
Yes, so I want to say that the World Trade Organization specializes in how they trade. Let me look it up.
No, don't look it up. Tell us what you think. There are no right or wrong answers. We're
it's just
vibing.
basically they enforce the rules of how they trade between nations and what resources there is for them to trade between those nations that they trade their resources to.
Absolutely. That is the core of what the World Trade Organization does, right? Because there has to be rules. That's why it's called the rules-based international order. Because if there are no rules, we know what happens when there are no rules. It becomes power competition, and it becomes the biggest guns win. And that's not how you want to. Alex, did you still want to speak? Alex, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something really quickly. Can you hear me?
Sure. Very well.
So I know one of the things that they do is not just in terms of trade, but they also monitor and I hate to say the word supervise, but other forms of economic disparities throughout the world. So, for example, I know one of the things that they oversee in terms of health throughout the world, and I know that also takes money. So, and I think that's part of the reason why they are so involved in it, is because of the money that's allocated to countries that are in dire need to be fed or to be provided with medical care.
Excellent. So,
Yeah.
so there are a number of does anybody any other comments?
I also want to add on like what he said, as far as like health goes, like they can like or they can assist in like trade in which they can assist like poor developing countries that are in poverty or are malnourished, or people that are suffering from lack of food or lack of economic resources that they need to help shape their economy.
All that is true. Any other comment?
I put my hand up.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
So, okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Stevenson.
yeah, I was thinking that there it's like when we had COVID, when we had the between China and the drugs that we had to get to for the COVID. So that's like a trade because we had to make decisions on what goes where, who gets what, and stuff like that.
Excellent. That is also true. So there, so after the Second World War, there became the United States led. Serge, did you still want to speak? Because I see your hands are still up. If you still want to speak out, I'm glad to give you the floor.
No apologies, I'll lower it now.
Okay. Um, so after the Second World War, obviously the United States, in partnership with European countries, were able to defeat Germany and Japan, who were the chief agitators, and obviously they have satellite states. Part of what came up after the Second World War was the United States leadership in creating an international order, to create institutions, first of all, that would help rebuild Europe and eventually the rest of the world, because Europe was very damaged economically and in terms of infrastructure due to the war. The other part of it was to be able to have a system to adjudicate conflict between nations. That way, the likelihood of war is minimized. The third was that there has always been a recognition among economists that economic growth requires international trade, but international trade can be filled with tension. So, how do you regulate the trade while also promoting trade? Right? Because it can seem counterintuitive. To regulate something can seem like you want to be able to tame its growth, but that's not really the intent. The idea of the regulation here is to shape the rules for trading. One before World War II, there was what is called the GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. After World War II, GATT evolved into WTO, World Trade Organization. And the significant difference between the two is that World Trade Organization included regulations on intellectual property. And patents, right? Because before you used to sell tangible goods, steel, corn, crude oil. But now patents have value. You have to protect patents, and that's an intellectual property. The other major component of WTO is that it has a conflict resolution mechanism. So when there is conflict between nations, there is a mechanism to attempt to resolve that conflict. Doesn't always work, but at least there is that intent, and the mechanism continues to be strengthened over time. The other major institutions that came up are called the Bretton Woods Institution. Again, the United States hosted a meeting in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and that's when the idea of the World Bank was formed. The World Bank is actually not one bank, it's a number of banks that is called the World Bank Group. But for the purposes of today, we're just going to call it the World Bank. The stated objective of the World Bank is to reduce poverty. The other institution that came up was International Monetary Fund, IMF. IMF, its primary goal is to stabilize national economies so that they are able to participate in global trade. Another significant institution that transformed after Second World War was from the League of Nations to the United Nations. We are going to cover these institutions. Right now, if you feel that this is too much information, too much names, too many organizations, and that is all confusing, I can assure you that in the weeks ahead, you are not only going to become very familiar with these institutions, you are going to better understand how they impact the transactions of our everyday life and how the choices we make politically, both from electing our city council member to electing our mayor to electing our governor to the House of Rep to our senators and eventually the president, influences, especially for the United States, the institutions, these global institutions. You will become very knowledgeable. Many of us are first or second generation Americans. So we still have contact with the old country. We still are very aware of the challenges, especially economic and public health wise, in the old country. Oftentimes, these are the challenges that informed either us or the generations before us migrating to the United States. You will get to understand, have a working knowledge of how these institutions can help or hinder by intent or unintentionally the growth of nation states. So if you are a business major, you can understand what the international climate that might impact your business, what they are. What you don't want to do is build a castle on the beach, a sandcastle on the beach, without knowing that a big wave is coming that is going to knock your castle over. So you need to have overview, right? You need to have beyond the horizon view. And this is what this class will attempt to do. And if I do my job halfway successfully, you will get it. So, any questions?
No.
Not at the moment.
Excellent. So this will conclude the formal side of office hour. So I'm going to stop recording so you can have any conversation or no conversation that you choose to engage in.